Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome to VBS Torah Study for a Shabbos morning. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein and I am delighted. I am so delighted to welcome
Oh,
back
stop,
my teacher and friend, Rabbi Mark Gelman, who has been on a
stop.
hiatus so that he might continue his spiritual journey um,
Yeah,
in Florida
please,
and
please,
Colorado.
don't stop. Please
It's
don't
just
stop.
wonderful to have
Please
you
don't
back, Mark.
stop.
I missed you. We missed you. Your
Oh,
audience
come on.
misses
I
you.
miss you too, and I'm glad
Anyway,
to be back.
glad to
And
have you. And
no
to those,
reason
yeah,
for anyone not to live in Florida. It's that good.
okay.
Okay, so
Um,
there we go.
so listen, for those who've been trying to get, I apologize. The last 2 weeks we've had some technical problems. Somehow the recordings didn't make it up onto YouTube or Facebook. So I dearly apologize for that. You can find them now on the VBS YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and put in Valley Beth Shalom Synagogue in the little search bar, you can find the last two Torah studies there. I apologize that we missed those. But we're back together, and I'm so delighted to have Rabbi Mark back with me again. And it's good to see you. And we want to wish Rabbi Sherry Hirsch our prayers for health and healing and wellness. And we have a terrific shot of your shirt there, Mark. You got it? There
Yeah,
you
I
go.
gotta fix that.
Okay, good.
Okay, there
So
we go.
this week we are in the middle of the story of Father Jacob, and
Yeah.
which is one of the most developed stories in the Torah, actually, in the entirety of Tanakh and the entirety of biblical literature, because it really shows us the development of a personality. Right up till now, the last weeks particularly, we saw Jacob as as his name would call him, a heel, the trickster, the manipulator. First wrestling with his brother in the womb, and then swindling his brother out of the birthright for a pot of stew, and then swindling his brother and his father out of the family blessing. And as the story last week ended, um, Esav, the older brother, swears a vendetta that as soon as Pop dies, I'm going to go get you, young man. And so Jacob has to leave home. And he kisses his parents goodbye and he takes off. And the story from here forward, if I just give you the arc of the story, and then I want to come back to the opening incident with Rabbi Mark, the story matches the story that you'll hear in the teaching of Joseph Campbell, the great mythologist, who said that in all of our human cultures, there is a cycle called the hero cycle. And the hero cycle is the hero has an event which forces them out of their comfort place, out of home, into the world to go on a journey. And on that journey, they're going to meet both allies and adversity. And the journey of the hero takes them through all kinds of challenges and finding all kinds of allies to help them, and eventually brings them back home, but it brings them back home changed, a different person, a deeper person, a wiser person. And that's the story of human development. It's the great hero story that you'll find all over world literature. Maybe the most familiar one, and it's in the news these days, of course, is The Wizard of Oz, right? Dorothy is whipped up by a tornado and plopped down in Munchkin Land, follows the yellow brick road, finds three allies, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, right? Has to meet the Wicked Witch of the West, right? Well, we now know is a good one, but well,
Yeah.
that's another story, right? Meets the wizard and then finds her way home again. And in finding her way home, I mean, the last scene in the movie is amazing because it reverts back to black and white. And you wonder, and Dorothy wakes up from the bang on her head and she whispers to Aunt Em, there's no place like home. There's no place like home. You sort of wonder what it's like to be back in a black and white world, having lived in Munchkin Land for this.
Exactly. Why would you leave Oz?
Why
There's
would
no
you
reason
leave
to leave
us?
Oz.
So, but the thing is, she comes back different. She comes back because that's the story of the hero. It's also the story of everyone's maturity, and it's the story of Jacob. Jacob is going to leave home, and you get the sense from the opening story that he's leaving home in a hurry because he's going to come to the first stopping place, which is Bethel, and he has to use a stone for a pillow. Now, what kind of man uses a stone for a pillow? When I was in Boy Scouts, we learned that if you don't have a pillow with you, you sleep on a towel or a sweatshirt or a girlfriend or a knapsack. But you use a stone for a pillow when you brought nothing with you, absolutely nothing with you. He is really He is really stripped of all the protection of the world. And he ends up going to Mesopotamia. He meets his uncle Laban, who is ultra uber trickster, who is going to trick him. He's going to end up with one, two, three, four women that he's married to. God help him, right? And 12 children. That's the story. And then he's going to have to make his way home as a different man, which is going to be our next story. The whole story, the whole narrative of Jacob's journey is bookended by two angels, two dreams, and two moments of revelation. This week, by the dream he has at Bethel and his first stop, and next week by the wrestling match he'll have with an angel just before he's about to cross back into the land of Israel and meet his brother. And in both cases, angels play a big role. So in this week, he leaves home. He's living in Beersheba. He leaves home, or rather in Kiryat Arba, and he leaves home and he makes his way north to Bethel. Bethel is just slightly north of Jerusalem. And he stops for the night. And the Torah says, Vayifga b'makom. He came upon a place. That's the literal meaning of it. But Vayifga doesn't mean it come upon. It means a place grabbed him. He bumped into something.
He
And
encountered.
encountered, but I think it's more like bumping in. It's more violent than just encountered. And
Hmm.
makom, of course, means a place, but makom is also one of the names, one of the terms for God. He bumped into God, and there he lies himself down, and he has this dream of a stairway to heaven. He wrote a good song about it later, and angels coming up and down, and God is there talking to him and offering him a promise. So let's begin there, Mark. What does it mean, vayifga b'makom? What does it mean to bump into a place? What does it mean to bump into God?
It's first of all, it's great to be back.
So good.
The reason I'm back is I love you and I love the people who send me notes saying we always loved you more than Eddie and we want you to come back.
And I
Thank you.
get so many of those notes too, and
I know, I
I
know.
burn
And
them at the end of the
and,
day,
and
though.
I, I listened to your Torah class last week because I needed to learn Torah from you. And your thing about the two blessings was so good. And I said, what are you doing that's more important than being with Eddie? And
Oh,
the answer
thanks.
was nothing.
Golf.
So thank you. So, all right, the first thing about this parsha, let's get something straight. Jews believe in angels. All right. I don't want anyone to say, oh, we're just a rational idea of doing the good thing and tikkun olam. No, no. All that's true, but we are believers that there are dogs and cats and rats and all sorts of animals and us. And above us, there's a level of being that is an intermediary level between us and God. That is like us, they are made by God. Unlike us, they don't have physical needs. They don't eat. They don't they don't sweat. But they're created by God. Basically, the way to think about angels is to think about those power lines that go in the street and elsewhere to bring us electricity. If the power that comes into your toaster wasn't wasn't transformed, is the electrical word, wasn't transformed into a lower level wattage, your toaster would blow up. If they just zapped it with the full electrical charge from the wires, it would blow up everything in your house that's electric. So that you need devices to power down the big power to levels where you can assimilate it. The same is true in spiritual life. And that's why God says, no man may see me and live. And even Moses can't see him. He can see his back, and occasionally we'll see when that comes up. But basically, nobody can see God and live. So because God is overwhelming, his power or its God's power, let's just say it that way, is so overwhelming that it would fry us in an instant if we saw it. So, what does God do? God creates these beings who intercede for God at various levels and do different things. And the rabbis eventually named them. There are occasionally angels named in the Tanakh. Michael and Gabriel are both named, Michael and Gabriel. But later on, there's Uriel and Nuriel, and there's a whole bunch of names of angels that do different things. And then, of course, the Christians went wild with angels and angelology and all sorts of stuff. But basically, we believe in angels. Now, what do they do? All right? They bring messages from God. That's their entire reason for existing. And we know that first from their name, a malach. Malach is the Hebrew word for angel, but it's also the Hebrew word for messenger. So they are bringing a message. What's the message? Well, it depends on who they're visiting. Could be the angels who visited Abraham, who told him that Sarah was going to have a kid. Could be the angel who later is going to wrestle with Jacob, although it says,
A man.
ish imo
Ish. Yeah. But we find out later that he's an angel, right?
could be the angel who told Joseph, he meets a guy in the field, where are my brothers? He said, oh, they went that way. How did he know who were their brothers? That was an angel. And that factor is critical. When we see angels,
Mhm.
we can't tell that they are angels. They look exactly like people. Now, there are some angels, and the rabbis got into this, Tanakh doesn't, who didn't look like people, who were I guess you could call them the cabinet angels. There's three or four of them. And Michael, Gabriel are the two big ones. And Michael is the one who protects Jews. But this idea that angels are indistinguishable from people is key, because what it means is you don't know if the person you're meeting is an angel or a person. And the
Mm.
New Testament got this right when it said people sometimes meet angels unawares, or Matthew says. And that's a very insightful comment, and it's true. So, and we know this also from the story of Jacob in this week's Parsha. What do we learn? If you look carefully, see the art of what you do so brilliantly, but just read it carefully. That's all. Read it carefully. So you're reading, there's a ladder with angels going up and down on it. What do you learn?
Mhm.
What you learn is they didn't have wings. You learn that immediately from just reading the story. If they had
Mm.
wings, they wouldn't need the ladder. And we know, and if they had wings, it might be a tip off when you meet someone. If they have wings in the back of their back, that
Might
they're
be an
not a
angel.
person. It's a
Right.
clue, a good clue.
Might be an angel. Right.
So, right. So, what we know is they look like people, but they're going up and down. And so now my final point is that that's all good. That's the Torah. A lot of you who are studying with us say, yeah, it's great, but I don't believe any of that stuff. So, thank you very much.
Hmm.
But let me just say this to you. You have met angels.
Mm.
Vayifgaba Makom is purposely vague because it's one of those transcendental moments in the Torah. V'higadata lebincha b'yom hahu. What God did for me when I left Egypt, you didn't leave Egypt, but the Torah says you did. You are standing here, all of you, this day at Sinai. We weren't all standing, but it says we were. So what we have here in the Torah is another example of a transcendental belief that you are being visited by angels.
Mm.
And your job as a human being, as a Jew, is to treat everyone you meet, every stranger particularly, as if they were an angel.
Well, I think that, what would be a wonderful question to ask people, and I've asked, you've asked too, is, leave aside the metaphysics of an angel. Just, was there ever a moment in your life when someone said something to you,
Yes.
particularly someone who wasn't acquainted, like usually if it's your dad or your mom or your mentor, it's one thing. But you ever meet a person who says something to you and it's exactly the thing you needed to hear, or it set you on a direction? I mean, again, the examples that you gave, Joseph is looking for his brothers and he meets an anonymous guy. Ish made, Ish, some guy's wandering in a field, and he says, "Where are my brothers?" He says, "Your brothers went that way." The whole of Jewish history depends on that guy giving him the directions. Because if he doesn't find his brothers, he doesn't get sold into Egypt. We don't go to, etc. Right?
We're not here.
Right. And in this case, you have a frightened young man who's running away from home. And from all indications, it's the first time he's ever slept away from home. And he's run away without a pillow, which means he's run away without a sleeping bag, which means he's by himself. The cold loneliness, the harshness of this night away. And comes an angel and puts his arm around him and says, "It's going to be okay. You're going to make it through this journey," right? And if you think about times in your life when someone came along and said just the right thing that you needed to hear, or the thing that set you on the right direction, or the thing when you look back on it, you realize how much of your life turned on that piece of advice, that piece of wisdom, that direction, that moment of reassurance or warning or wisdom. And then you say, there's something, at least in my own life, forget the metaphysics about this, at least in my own life, that's a transcendent moment.
Yep.
It transcended the flow of events in my life and set it right, set it in the right direction. How many of us, met our spouse, you know, and somebody whispered to us something and said, like, "Marry her, idiot," right?
Yeah.
And said to you, "This is the one you're meant to be with," right? We weren't sure. Push you forward, right? Push you forward. So what is vifgaba makom? Do people have these encounters? Do you find people having?
Yes, they have them. And I was explaining to you for the last months that I've been away, I'm still writing this weekly column, which you can get online if you Google God Squad articles by Mark Gelman. It's
Hmm.
syndicated by Tribune all over the country. And it's an interfaith um, advice column that Tom Hartman, may his memory be blessed, and I began about 30 years ago. And when he was sick, he said, "You got to continue the column. You have to swear to me." And I did. And every week I do it. So at one point, a woman writes in that she's had an experience with her mother who died, and who she sent a sign that was undeniable that it was from her mother. And I called it a God wink, like a little wink from God. Don't forget, you're not alone. And don't forget, death is not the end of us. Big Gilman point. And so I said to my other readers, have any of you had God winks? Thousands, I mean, thousands of letters of God winks have flooded me. And some of them are extraordinary. And the thing that's amazing about all of them is that these are common people, ordinary people. These are not fancy people. These are not famous people. These
Hmm.
are not um, psychics or mediums who make their money telling people that this is a message from the other side, which I totally detest. These are people who've had sincere, life changing experiences, some of which cannot be explained rationally. Guys going to look for his great grandmother's grave in Connecticut with his brother. And they're looking at this old dilapidated cemetery, and finally they find her grave, and her stone, they can barely make out her name. It's covered with moss. And they had split up, so one brother screams to the other, "Come over here, Joey, come over here." And the guy comes over to look at the stone. And when they looked at the stone, there was no moss on it.
Mm.
And to prove to me that this really happened, they took a time-stamped picture of finding the stone with all the moss, and then another time-stamped picture, which was only 5 minutes later, where there isn't a shred of moss on the whole thing.
Yeah.
So these are the kinds of things that, and visions. I have it all cataloged, but the point is, it's a common thing for
If you're
people.
if you're paying attention.
That's the key point.
Right.
If you say, well, that's very good, but I don't believe in angels, well, guess what? You're never going to see one.
Mhm.
Even if you say, I believe in angels, it doesn't mean you're going to see one, but it means you have a chance. Now, God winks aren't necessarily angels. There's all sorts of ways that God communicates with us. I prefer your definition: a person with a message who comes to you, usually a stranger, and says you'd make a good doctor or you'd make a good rabbi, and or that woman likes you, you don't realize it, and that's your wife or your husband, this man likes. Or in my case, Nelson Glick took me, I was from the University of Wisconsin, the Hebrew department. It took me up to the roof of the Hebrew Union College in 1966, before the war. And he says, Mark, that's the old city, and there's a wall there. And the Arabs believe it's the Axis Mundi, the navel of the universe. And I believe it too. And you will be a rabbi to teach that to people someday.
Mm.
Totally freaked me out.
Right.
But he changed my life. He
Hmm.
changed my life.
Yeah. Well, there's these. If you're paying attention, these moments actually do come. It's an amazing thing. Now, in the
How about
story,
you? How about you, my friend?
I've had the same, moments.
Well, I want to hear.
I've had moments of reassurance, moments of guidance, moments when a teacher took me under their wing. I was
How about
ready
when
to.
you how
What?
about when you were sick? Did you get any messages that
Well,
things
I've
were
told that
okay?
story many times. I had, so
I
I
didn't hear it,
all right. So it's in my book because I've told this story many times.
but I
So
don't read books. So
I know, I'm sorry. Except the Torah. I had I had a very, very scary diagnosis of cancer the second time. It was a metastasis and a very, very long, complicated surgery. And I was out for 3 days after the surgery. It was like 11 hours of surgery, so it was an awful lot of anesthesia. I wake up in the middle of the night in Kaiser Hospital, 3 o'clock in the morning. I wake up in terrible pain. My mouth is dry as sandpaper. I can't see anything because my glasses aren't on. I have IVs and monitors on all over my body. And the first thing I did just instinctually is pull out one of the monitors. So this alarm goes off. And this fellow walks in the room and he's this very large African American man. And he said, "What the hell did you do?" And I said, "I'm going to die." And he said, "You're not going to die. Too much paperwork. Stay right here and shut up." He turns off the alarm. And I said to myself, "Great, I'm dead and I'm in hell. There's the devil himself." And he comes back in with a bucket of warm water and a sponge, and he puts back the IVs that I'm saying, gives me a button. He says, "Push this button, the pain will go away." And they give me this button that gives me a shot of medicine, and the pain goes away. And he gives me a sort of a wipe down with this stuff, and he gives me something to suck on. And he says, "My name is Robert, and I'm your night nurse. And we're going to be together for a couple of nights. So let's get something straight. You do what I tell you to do. We'll be fine." I said, like, "Yes, sir." And we started talking. And this guy was amazing. I mean, first of all, doctors are doctors, but nurses save our lives.
Yeah.
And because they come with, I mean, doctors are brilliant and they know biochemistry, and many of them are wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. But nurses have a heart, and they give you the will to live because they care so much. And this guy just willed me back into life because I really did feel like I was gone. And he willed me back into life. And he was my nurse for 10 nights, and then we said goodbye. And to this day, I don't even know if he's real. I swear to God, because
Yeah. Yeah.
here's this 6'5" African American guy taking care of this rabbi. At one point, he said to me, "You have faith?" I said, "Well, it's sort of what I do for a living." And he'd come by every morning when his shift was over, about 7 in the morning when he was leaving, and say, "You be here tonight when I get back, or else." I said, "Okay, okay."
That's a wonderful story.
So I believe in angels because I met him, because I met one. And you're right, no wings, no harps, no robes, no halos, just a bucket of warm water and a sponge and a thing to suck on after my surgery, and a heart of just incredible compassion and kindness and strength. I mean, he knew when I needed to be shoved. He knew when I needed to be told, "Stop complaining. You're going to get through this. You're going to get through this."
That is a great story. And the other element of angels is that not only don't they have wings and they're just like they are not just like people. They are actual people.
Yeah.
This guy, if he was real, he could have been another kind of angel, but let's assume he was real. He's a real person. The thing about it, angel, is that they don't even know that they're an angel.
Yeah.
They are delivering a message from God, but they have no clue that that's what they're doing.
Hmm.
I have this all the time. My most common experience as a rabbi is someone saying, I don't know, you came to me today, you talked to me today, you picked up the phone to call me today. It was exactly what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
And I said, well, thank you. I'm just calling. They ask, why are you calling? And in some cases, many cases, I call people who aren't expecting a call from me. And they say, you were my angel.
Right. Sometimes I think that adversity, I think that, facing a difficult moment is what it takes to sort of open you up. Because I mean, that was a moment I was after surgery. I was terrified of what might happen to me. I was in a tremendous amount of pain, physically and psychologically. You and I talk to people all the time who are in those conditions, and it opens people. They listen better. They become more attentive.
And the final thing about it for me is we're talking about levels of let's talk about the message. Sometimes the message is muted.
Mm,
You'd be a great doctor. Yeah, fine. That's it could be a real message from God, or it could be just your uncle who thinks that's a good way to make a living. Um, there are occasional messages which are undeniably from God. And those are the ones that change the world and change your life completely
hmm
because they are completely and absolutely self evident. And the two examples that I have both concern a guy who I now think probably was an angel or a saint of some sort, Tom Hartman. I'm on the local cable TV channel with him the day we met, in which it was Passover and Easter on the same day. And we had a 2-minute conversation on air. Someone fixed us up together. 2 hours later, we're in the parking lot. And I say, look, I got to go home. I'm calling Florida. I was just been offered a big job there, and I have to call him tonight to let him know before Seder. And he said, "Well, you're not going to Florida." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Because I had a dream last night and God came to me and God said, tomorrow you're going to meet someone I love and I want you to tell him I'm not through with you here."
Mm.
I said, "I've just known you for an hour. Do you normally screw up someone's life and a no-brainer new job that
Right.
just because you have you ever had a dream of God? No. Did this ever happen to you? No. Did you know what it meant when it happened? No, but now I do. God's not through with you." So I said, "Well, if I give up this job, I'm stuck here on Long Island. What do I do?" He said, "Well, I know the head of ABC. Let's go. You know, they have doctors doing medical news, lawyers doing, they don't have any clergy doing religious news on ABC. We'll go on Good Morning America as the God Squad, and we'll do religious and interfaith and ethical news."
He made up the title, the God Squad.
We made it up. Tommy made it up.
Tom
Yeah.
made it up. Yeah.
Yeah, and the next day, we were hired by ABC. We were the first people hired by ABC since Bishop Fulton J. Sheen in
Wow.
the clergy. And so there's no question what happened to me. I mean, you'd have to be an idiot not to realize you just got rung up. You got run up. I don't know why. I'm certainly not worthy of it, but that's what happened. That's what happened. And
Right.
then when Tommy died, I said, "Look, I know there's all this debate about life after death, but please do me a favor, settle it for me. When you die, let me know." So 2 years later, I'm having lunch with the guy who introduced us. And he said, he says to me, "Tom Hartman's ghost came into my bathroom this morning." And he says, "So you're having lunch with my friend today, I understand. And here's what I want you to tell him. Tell him Saul thinks he's running heaven, and heaven is the most beautiful place you've ever seen." So the guy looks at me and he says, "Mark, who is Saul?" And I said, "Michael, Saul is my dead father."
Oh my God.
And this was a sign that only
Yeah.
Tommy could have known because I
Right.
never spoke about my father to Michael. And it was a sign that I demanded of Tommy or requested. I said, "Make it to be a sign. I don't want a red bird, please. It's not a red bird. I don't want that. I want
A lucky
something that's
penny. Yeah.
undeniably from you. And I wanted something that's incontrovertibly a sign that life after death is real." And there it was.
There it was.
There was. And so I said, "Saul is my father. And it's also my father's nature to think he was running heaven." That
Right.
was exactly the way he was. And it was Tommy's sense of humor to say it that way. So occasionally, in my case, in my life, there have been twice those times when things happen to you that just have no explanation other than what they really
And
clearly are.
they turn you. That it's not just that things happen. Things happen all the time that make no sense, right? But that it turns your life, and then as you look back on it, there's a kind of beshert quality because you look back and you say, it's a good thing that happened to me because look what I would have missed or didn't have a chance to do if I hadn't paid attention. That's the quality. It's retroactive. So in the Torah has that too, because God comes to Jacob at this moment. He's watching the angels go up and down, and God's standing next to him, and God puts his arm around Jacob and says, "Look, I'm going to take care of you on this journey. I'm going to make sure that you're safe. In other words, go on the journey. Don't hide from the journey." He's the manipulator. You know, he's a trickster, and he needed to be told, "Do this journey and confront the adversity you're about, and I will be with you, and I will bring you home." And then he wakes up from the dream, and the first thing Jacob says is, "Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh anochi lo yadati." God is in this place, and I didn't know it. Right? He's surprised. It's a wonderful expression of surprise. There's a beautiful book, by the way, by a wonderful author, by Larry Kushner, who takes that verse and it shows 7 different ways that that verse has been interpreted in the tradition. Lawrence Kushner's Yesh Adonai Makoma, that God is in this place, Va'anochi lo yadati, and I didn't know it. And I didn't know it. And that's what happens when we have these moments, right? That's sort of the response. And then the sad thing that happens next, of course, is Jacob then makes a vow. He anoints the rock, calls it the shrine of Bethel, and he says, "Thank you, God, for taking care of me. If you do all the things you tell me you've said you do for me, I'll give you 10%. I'll give you 10%." And you say, like, oh gosh, he's not
He hasn't
changed
changed.
yet. What? Not yet. He hasn't changed yet. Later, next week, I have good news for you. By next week, we're going to see how he's changed. Because at the
And
end of the next week's stream, he's going to say, I'm not worthy of all the things that have happened to me. But at this
right.
point, this is adolescent religion. Do
Well,
for me,
here's how I
take me,
take
and
that.
I'll give you 10%. I'll give you that much back.
I always had that interpretation of Jacob until recently, and now I think of it differently, um, because of the God winks. 99% of the God winks that I get from readers are stories of how a dead relative comes to them and in one way or another, either with words or wordlessly, tells them everything will be all right. Everything will be okay. It seems to be the one message that God wants us to hear most persistently. Everything will be okay.
You have it in you to deal with this.
And that's the key thing, which is Jacob has believed that things would only be okay if he manipulated them.
If he was in control of the thing.
Yes. Now he's beginning to learn, oh, I can let go and let God. Let go and let God. Let God
Mm,
direct my life, and then it will work out. But the thing that people need to learn, need to hear, is that everything will be okay. This isn't complicated stuff. A lot of theology gets overcomplicated for people. What you need to know is that everything will be all right. And God
mm,
is putting in your life all sorts of evidence that things will be all right.
mm. That's beautiful. So, but when my first son, my first child, my son was born, I remember, one of the first, I called my parents and I told my mother, and she began to like weep. It was great. She's a grandmother. And then I talked to my dad and I said, Pop, I don't know how to raise a kid. I don't know how to do that. And the irony, of course, is my father, who finished high school. And here's his son with all these advanced degrees in the humanities and social sciences. And my father said to me something really angelic. He just said, just love him. You'll do fine. Just love him. You'll do fine. It was exactly that. It was like, don't be afraid. Like, don't be afraid. You can handle this. Don't be afraid. Whatever's coming, you can handle it. And he was right. And I ended up saying the same thing to my kids when their kids were born.
And
It'll be
if
fine.
you realize one of the interesting factoids of the Bible, of the Tanakh, is that the most common phrase in the whole Tanakh is not Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe, the God spoke to Moses. The most common phrase in the whole Tanakh is Al Tira.
Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. So Yesh Adonai b'makom hazeh v'anochni lo yadati. God is around us and we don't know it. And this Torah portion comes to open our eyes and open our ears. Mark, thank you for sharing this with me.
Oh, God, it was good to be back.
Good to be back. And thank you all for listening and have a wonderful Shabbat and a wonderful week and take good care. And let's just hope peace comes to us all. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.